first off, just thank you all for being present with us, and I just want to give like so many kudos to my peers here because y'all killed it. Like Dr. Taylor said before, my project is titled Black Space, an Unknown Black History of People's Park. And I really just want to give a little background history about what People's Park is, if you don't know. So 3 blocks south of UC Berkeley's campus sits a 2.3 acre plot of land owned by the UC, and it's called People's Park, a space that had been liberated in the late 1960s. The university actually obtained this land through eminent domain previous to that liberation, and this space before that liberation was residence to Black and brown folks before the houses were condemned, and then that land lay dormant for 2 years after being condemned until People's Park was built. The continuous battle of People's Park is known worldwide. However, this history is often centered around like white hippies, but for me, I noticed and felt that that is very far from the truth. So I really want to talk about how I came to this project personally. So both of my grandmothers specifically had experiences in the park and that they told me about before UC Berkeley. So my paternal grandmother was actually present during the creation of the park and was on campus studying at Berkeley. And she kind of told me stories about what the war zone looked like because the National Guard got called in and also campus got tear gas sprayed throughout campus as well as Southside Berkeley. And this story definitely intrigued me because what was so important about this park that like the military and industrial complex got brought in to halt its creation, right? However, my maternal grandmother's story really connected me to the space and also made me understand the power. So my Nana, which I've always called her, she's from New York initially, and when she first came out to California, she actually came to People's Park. She was kind of like, you know, a gypsy, one might say, in older days. So she was traveling around a lot, having a lot of different experiences. And she tells me this story about when she first went to the park, she stayed there for a whole week, right? And she was sitting around the fire every day with just, you know, a whole bunch of random people, but just the feeling of love that she experienced, you know, sitting there having food with people, and, you know, you're not having to pay for anything, you're just living. And she told me this, that go to the park because you're gonna experience love in a way that you're not gonna experience on your campus. And I would say for the most part that was really true, besides for the African American Studies Department, of course. But this story also was a kind of a lead up to like me being created or my family going to Humboldt County. So after she stayed in the park for a bit, she like traveled up with some people to Humboldt County where my family still lives. And that's kind of how I got connected to the park. She told me this right before I went, so she just emphasized how important it was to go to that space. And that was really like my first connection to the park. And so within my first semester being on campus, I'm a third year now, I went to the park numerous times and just met all kinds of people. Like you're always gonna meet the most random people at the park, and it's always so fun because everyone has so much life experience, right? And so many stories that they can tell. And I just love talking to people. So being in a space like that, it felt really comforting. And you kind of lose the concept of time. You're not stressed about all these other things, these deadlines. Oh, I need to be here at this time. All of that kind of just goes away. So you just kind of get to live, which is really, you know, really sacred. And I think that's a part of being in a liberated space is like none of that really matters anymore. And these experiences aren't unique. I would say that a lot of people who go to the park feel that way. However, the institution has definitely made immense efforts to halt these experiences. And I really spent my first year investigating why that is. So through various assignments that I was given in class, I focused on the park and really honed in on this policing system called Warn Me that our UC uses. Kind of, to me, feels like a technique of propaganda, instilling this sense of fear around the space. We constantly receiving notifications saying, avoid the space, violent crime at People's Park in all caps. And so it kind of just made me think. So even unconsciously, as a campus community, we're associating People's Park with violent crime. Even if you're not reading what actually happened, just that little message popping up on your phone, you're starting to think of these things. And that's creating imagery and negative connotations that we often associate with Blackness in general, which is like violence, drug use, poverty, all things that the university was trying to make us afraid of, right? And I think as academics, we also try to distance ourselves from that. I personally grew up with my family hustling and doing things, so that was something that I had always been connected from, and I can't separate my life experiences from. And that's why I started thinking about this space very differently with the way the institution was framing it. And understanding and investigating this was truly the beginning of this project's manifestation. So after my first year, on June 6, 2020, I actually would see my future collaborator, Polly, speak at a rally for People's Park, focusing on a song, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, which was initially written by Obie Benson. And Polly also focused on the local organizing efforts that were often segregated in Berkeley. And this segregated organizing would also be reflected in the telling of this history. And the statement that stood out to me the most was at the end of his speech. End quote, he says, "If you look deeper, you'll see that the history of People's Park is also the history of Black people." End quote. I believe that this is a statement that planted a seed within me, allowing me to identify a history that needed to be uncovered and told. So I applied for the small grant program through the Black Studies Collaboratory with Polly as my collaborator/advisor, really asking the questions, how is People's Park a Black space? How did Black folk inspire and influence the creation of People's Park? And why do the people, as in Black people, often get forgotten and neglected in the telling of the narrative or history of People's Park? As for my methodology, after getting this grant and starting doing this work, it's very unconventional, as is the park, right? And very unconventional within the confines of academia. So I often found myself being led to archives and sources. And Paul Lee, throughout his life, had been collecting an extensive amount of documentation on People's Park, but was really unsure of why he was collecting this, but he just knew he had to. However, once we met and connected, he knew. He actually sent me a text message this morning because he knew I was presenting, which I wanted to share with you guys. He says, "When you first shared your vision, I immediately understood the purpose of my decades of research on the park, namely to turn it over to you." To which I responded, "Although you may think this is my vision alone, it's a collective vision that has been manifesting. Yours began with your mom and mine with my grandma. We are doing this work to keep their stories alive." I'm a very spiritual person, and my research pursuits are heavily connected with spirit, as for this project, and I truly believe the spirit of the park. So Polly and I have kind of coined maybe a new form of methodology, which we call our third eye research, where you're allowing your connection to God, the universe, or spirit itself to lead you to the information needed for the project. I can't really fully explain this experience, but I'll give an example. So I've always been quite a nerd, and I always loved going to libraries growing up. And Berkeley has, some amazing libraries. So, walking the stacks and just looking and finding things is such an amazing experience for me. So, I also use the online database to find the actual documents needed. And I was looking on our library's database one day and found a 1969 document from a Dutch architect on campus in the environmental design library. So I made the adventure up there. I'd never been into this library before. I never thought I would step into this library, but I went. And I found this document. And before even opening the document, I knew its importance because it was right next to another document. And the other document was a project that same architect had been working on back in my hometown in Humboldt County. And the project was on this place called Hartsook, and it's this rundown hotel in the middle of the redwood forest, right? And my uncle was actually the caregiver to that space and had been tending to it. It's been run down for 50 years, but for 10, 15 years of my life, my whole family was living at this abandoned hotel, right? And this same architect did a project on it and also on People's Park. So I just felt there was this connection there that I can't explain fully, but I just knew that this was gonna be so important. And this document on People's Park was an ethnographic document. This person was talking to every side of what was happening, from the students to the activists to the National Guard to the administration. So it is so rich, and it was just so beautiful to stumble upon it in the way that I did. And with our collaborative third eye research, we have been able to imagine and create a project that steps far outside the walls of academia, challenging us to find and use sources that many academics probably wouldn't. So Paul Lee is a pretty renowned historian and has heavily contributed to the array of primary sources that we've collected, such as newspaper articles, television, newscast outtakes and clips, pamphlets and propaganda, as well as oral histories of community members. However, I was able to use my third eye to see things that he had not previously. So in the different images here, you can see, some panthers, some Black folk in the back of it. I could keep clicking. Black folks stewarding the land, tending to the land. This is the creation of that space, right? Putting their love and care into it. You know, playing music, looking at the post signs, being in community. And on that picture to the most right, you actually see Bobby Seale there. And he was there on the first day of the park. And I received a book from someone who has a chess club on the streets of Berkeley. They gave me a book that talked about Bobby Seale's first interaction on the day of the creation of the park. So, you know, this is just really powerful. But Paul Lee had seen all of these images and had never stopped and really recognized who was in them. And so I was able to do that for him, and also just, you know, us do it together. And you can keep clicking. Yeah, there's just a lot, you know, a lot of us there in community. And in this picture specifically, Paul Lee and I talk about how it's kind of giving cookout energy, and, you know, how we are able to bring that into that space, you know, and bring our community into that space. And eating food, eating soup, tending to the land once again. So there's just a whole bunch of energy, you know, that we have put into that space. Yeah. And this is some of the protests here. This is also one of the protests. So as you can see from these images of the creation of this space, we're all over it, you know what I mean? And also a big influence of this creation is rooted in us as well. So there's 3 movements that we identified really leading to the formation of this space, which is the free speech movement, the Black Power movement, and the Third World Liberation Front. And all of those, you know, are rooted in Black folk and our inherent desire to be liberated, to be free. And without us educating and having these discussions on Berkeley's campus, the students in the local community would have never, in my opinion, never been inspired to create a space like this and think about what does liberated space look like. And this project is ongoing and still flowing, especially now that that university has actually seized the park. So you can see here, this is not the best image, but right now there is 2 storage containers stacked upon each other all around the park, all around the space, with razor wire on top of it. And they have 24-hour security surveilling this, you know, surveilling this storage unit container box. So this, you know, this battle continues and goes on. And I think this, I do believe that telling this history and talking about the Blackness of the space is going to be integral to reclaiming or reliberating that space or other spaces, because that is part of this movement. People's Park also had a space called People's Pad, which is another zone that my grandma actually stayed in, that was in Southside Berkeley. Folk took over an apartment building, and a whole bunch of Black folks started living in it. It was mainly Black people, and they called it People's Pad, and that's where a whole bunch of folk just lived in until, you know, until they got kicked out. So this movement doesn't just take in this space; it, you know, is going to move. So I did make an Instagram, and that's kind of just where there's some images. So, and this is just kind of the first aspect of how I envisioned this project to come to fruition. And as Dr. Taylor mentioned before, this is a multimedia, multi-dimensional project, meaning I do want it to take many forms, through creating a website which will contain an archive as well as a podcast and just more information. And I want to host teach-ins and also do an art gallery pop-up to display these images in, you know, in a blown-up way. And this project, Black Space, an unknown Black history of People's Park, will be intrinsic in deliberating the space again. The ancestors of the space want their stories told, shared, and centered, especially as their history has been neglected and erased. So I really appreciate you guys all for listening, and thank you so much for being here with us.